Thank you so much. I think what we're going to do, one of the first things we're going to do as a little bit of overview before we get into um, introductions and kicking this presentation off. Um, a bit of background, we ran a Follow the Sun event earlier this year where we used a Miro board. I'm calling it Miro now. Janice may be the one that got me on that because it's easier to distinguish between Mural and Miro. So Miro board. And we basically took 24 hours, went all around the globe and had everybody chime in. We're going to use that same board today. We have the presentation in this board, and I would like, pretty please, for everyone that's joined and is going to participate to just give it a shot and try to follow along with us in the Miro board and participate. And I've got a little icebreaker. So it looks like Janice has put it in there. You shouldn't have to make an account. You should be able to join as a guest and just kind of enter the board. And I'm going to zoom out. I should also say, you do not have to do this. You are welcome to just follow along as I present. And even if you want to, you could just post things into the chat that you'd like us to add. This board is enormous. It's one of the biggest ones I've ever been a part of because it continues to be added to. I think since we ran the event, I don't know if that was April, somewhere in the spring, in here, anytime I come in, there's always somebody in here looking around or doing something. So it's a really, really fantastic resource. We've spent a lot of time and we continue to use it. I think I'm just about to get to the intro, but we are part of the Building Smart Airport Room. Jerry and I run the Digital Twins working group inside of that. And we actually run our monthly catch-up call in here. We make sure that we're adding, questions, comments, work actions, everything in here. And it's a fantastic resource. So in the very, very bottom left corner, it's just Zoom wheel in and out. We've put the webinar, and I've tried to use frames. They're a little bit, there's a lot of frames in this. Like I said, it's the biggest one I've been in. So I'm going to use this to hop through it. And I can see there's already 19 people in. So I'm going to maybe
It was a swarm.
yeah. There's 41 in the webinar though. So a minute, click on the link if you can. But I can do this thing where I bring everyone to me. So I'm just going to do that once. I promise not to continue to do that unless I feel like, unless we get to an activity, and then I'm going to drag you back because you can get really lost in this board. So with that, I think it's probably a good time to kick it off. My name's Chris Harmon. I lead digital delivery and innovation for the WSP transportation and infrastructure sector inside of the US. So hopefully you followed that as I drilled in on what I do. I also work with Jerry and Cindy and a bunch of other fantastic people on the airport room, and we are really interested and excited about digital twins. So with that, I'll hand it to Jerry.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jerry Schwinghammer. There's an update to this. I've just recently joined Cygnus Consulting and doing work with those folks, a smart group. They're doing like airfield and airspace modeling and the like. And also my bringing into this is my airport computer management and airport planning background as well, with a particular twist, digital twins.
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool.
glad to be here. Thanks.
So hopefully you can tell I'm going to just click through like this. It's going to run just like a PowerPoint, maybe a little bit more stuff on my screen. But to kick it off, to get people in, to get you used to kind of how Miro works, if you can see on my screen, there is the ability to add directly into here media, stickers, emojis, GIFs, or you can go to Giphy.com. But this is an icebreaker. So ideally, everyone would do it right now. In the kind of center, I've put a little bit of like a prompt for us to use. So it's how I feel when I think about all the data. And so this would be, there's a couple in here already, some laughing. This would be kind of like how you feel. So if you've got a good one that you like, I can think of one. I was thinking earlier, but I actually know what I'm going to use, and that's And all you do is go to share and copy link. And then if you just Control V that in, you should get it. There I am. Well, this is how I feel. Oh, I know this one. This is a good one. Oh, these are good. Yeah. You know, I saw an icebreaker once, which was like, which Nicolas Cage are you? And it just had every single facial expression and character Nicolas Cage has ever played. And I always liked that. And, you know, the real reason behind doing this is not to kind of be obnoxious about the data, but to really just focus on getting you used to Miro, how it works. It's pretty intuitive. You know, you just drag sticky notes over, and I am 100% fine with this presentation being marked up. If you want to add a sticky note somewhere with a comment, just throw it on there. If you disagree, type it in. If you've got something you think would help, please do that, because I think the only other bit of intro is that I'm in a very like tactical delivery role. And so I do things more, which means that I'm not as, I guess, I'm not a professor. And whenever I present to people from academia, it's generally not liked. So I don't know. I don't know what exactly how I'm trying to say this, but hopefully you're following what I'm putting down. Okay.
That's my counterpart. I tend to drift off into the ethereal and abstract. So hopefully we strike a balance between the two of us.
Yeah.
Enjoy working with Chris. He has a great mind.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Jerry. So I'm gonna kick it off here. I'm gonna move over to standards and terminology. Follow along, please. I think, Jerry, I might let you just run through this. The intent, though, is probably not to read all of this at everybody.
No, no, absolutely not. And if you want to just scroll up a little bit higher on that, you'll see there's two links for Building Smart International and Building Smart USA, the USA chapter. Really, just to underscore, we could always use your help. And if you could join more formally and help out with that, it'd be excellent. Standards are always something that are kind of an unpaid thing. So we have to do that collectively, as our effort as professionals is to give back to the organizations and give back. So if you can think about giving back to our data communities, that way it'd be awesome. Just handy for your reference are some of the terminologies in here, industry, foundation classes through Building Smart. You can get smarter, teach yourself. I think that's what we have to do these days. But there's a lot of information about the ISO standards, Building Smart Data Dictionary, model view definition, collaboration formats, and the like. So want to just make sure that you have those. There is information out there. It's not completely wild and untamed. So we're just trying to build on that. And then I'd like to zoom in on the vision to roadmap, Chris. This is where I'm going to kind of talk a little bit and then hand off to you to kind of do the lion's share of this whole presentation. And I'll just be providing kind of a commentary and flavor as we go, and hopefully maybe field some questions if they come up in the chat. So you need this abstract or construct around any kind of data initiative, or you'll get lost in all the shiny things. Oh, look at what this app does, or look what that app does, or look if I just did this data piece. You need context as in terms of what are the problems you're trying to solve. And that should drive all of your thinking processes. It's like, who's going to use this? If I have to market this tomorrow, start with that framework in mind, is like, who's the end user? So there's a lot of like design thinking and other types of frameworks you could use, but this simply, start your task one is to really pin down the vision and the architecture and the use cases and what you're trying to solve. And then from there, you'll end up with a business architecture, capabilities modeling, etc. And then you'll get into the data and information systems that are necessary to deliver it, and the technology architecture, which is actually a really big deal in digital twins because there's just so many sensors and so many different ways of moving data, transmitting data, and just volumes of data. And then ultimately a roadmap to kind of keep you straight. So that's kind of the bookends. And I encourage you as you go to build your twin, because they're not off the shelf. You got to build them. And Chris and I will dive into that in some detail in terms of building off of a previous webinar we did on the components of a digital twin. So look forward to it. I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Jerry. I think this is good. This presentation is going to touch on a lot of these elements, particularly in the system and technology architecture spaces, but it's not formatted that way. It's a kind of more of a set of examples to kind of show you how data moves through and the way we're using it, and really kind of more of the hurdles and roadblocks that are out there and why we think this is important. So with that, I think one of the first start with was a use, right off the bat, just to get maybe the juices flowing. This is a walk bridge in Norwalk, Connecticut. It's a very, very busy railway corridor, commuter rail, and they're replacing a very old movable bridge with a raising. So it's a swing bridge, one of the last ones, and they're going to replace it. And so phased construction, complicated existing conditions, a lot of, kind of public engagement, making people feel good about disruptions is a big part of this. We've been delivering it for a number of years. One of the things or tools that we used was a digital twin, and we liked calling it a digital twin for a while. We have a pixel streaming environment in Unreal Engine, and all that means is there's a website you can go to, and you can drive around, and you can play certain functions, and you can see certain things. And this was a really good use case for digital twins. This was very complicated. You could see it in an airport kind of environment where you've got gate closures or openings and you're trying to simulate it, the impacts to operations, those kinds of things. What we found was it started to become beneficial for us to call what we were doing in the digital twin what it was. So instead of calling it a digital twin, we spent a lot of time on a monitoring visualization tool. So sensors to obtain tables and graphs of the data. So like displacement plots or inclinometers, tilt meters, vibration monitoring. We had a bunch of sensors out there, and they wanted to monitor that and be able to access that. And so we gave them a visual tool for accessing that data. Public engagement was a big part. And so utilizing a web app to kind of quickly link you to current, the local detours, whatever they'd worked out for the current one, and kind of giving people an access to that. And it was really a series of links, but it's a central kind of place to go and visually see everything. And then construction phasing, calling it a construction phasing tool and understanding closures was really important. We have construction phasing in the tides became really important because there was a lot of work along the banks, and this is tidally influenced, and so that became important. So we had to work that in. That became a critical part of the construction process, and we needed to work it in and have it visible. So what that ended up looking like in reality was a series of kind of use cases, and then how are we going to get there? So for like the public involvement tool, what was the interface? How do they want to interact with it? What data was required? When we need the 3D models and animations, what data types do we have? Where it's going to be Autodesk, a mix of Bentley and Unreal Engine. What frequency? How often are you going to update this? What nodes do we have? Static models, right? And the same could be true. We actually have a much longer list that we implemented for this, but this was the thinking. And the reason it says call it what it is because we often found when we were calling it or trying to describe it as a digital twin, it made it really hard to meet expectations, because there is, I think, an understanding that if I get a digital twin for my project or my whatever system or location I'm operating, it's going to fold my laundry, it's going to make me lunch, it's going to do it all. But if you call it a tidal visualization tool, you're pretty sure what it's going to do. It's going to show you what the tides are going to be like. And so that's the kind of flow we were really aiming for and how we capture that. So go ahead, Jerry. You gonna say
And
something?
you can finish your
No, no, I'm done. I was about to move to the next slide.
no, okay, perfect then. So just to kind of build a little bit on that that idea of what you call it. Um, some of the largest digital twins out there aren't called digital twin, like Google Maps. I mean, if you want to think about a massive, massive digital twin, it's visual representation of the real world, and there's all kinds of predictive modeling going on there, interaction with the users, collaborative environment. And so you don't necessarily need to call it digital twin. In fact, in some ways, you can go from noun to verb. It's your digital twinning data. You're twinning data to physical assets. And that's kind of a nuance, but that's an academic piece, Chris, that people can think about, but it's a different
Right.
abstraction that it's not necessarily that physical noun, but it's that activity of matching digital data to virtual and physical assets.
I really like that. I've seen that same evolution with BIM. It used to be that it was building information models, and now the noun, a building, and now we've kind of moved into BIM is a process of building, the verb, creating information models, right? And that's BIM has seen that a similar kind of evolution, and I think it's really important to think about it that way.
Yeah, so if they try to box you in a quarter, get out with the verb card.
Thank you.
All right, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, so I think that BIM comment is a good intro because, and I've organized this presentation to a series of columns. So from this one, we're going to kind of move into our definition of a digital twin, and then into some of the data applications and making the data usable, kind of what this is all about. So you have to bear with us if this is all kind of, stuff that but it's a really good way for us to kind of layer our way through this. So I don't know where this came from. I found it in this board. And if anybody knows the source, drop it on there. But I really liked it because I think it's important for us to start with a definition of IFC. And, it's broken it down into a set of layers, right? So a resource layer, generic things not specific to architecture, engineering, construction. A core layer, basic things in AEC. Shared layers, so things that are common across disciplines. And then domain layers, which are specific to each discipline. And there's a good graphic that kind of covers that. Let me make sure this is, I will lock that. But I didn't include it. I just really liked the hierarchy. It helps me to kind of think about it that way. And I'm also going to, I don't know how recent this is, but I'm going to walk everyone through this kind of open BIM workflow using some examples. So right at the start of the project, you're going to want to set your information delivery specification, your IDS, and define your information requirements. So there's a little sticky here that says, provides information standards to IFC. For example, solar panels must be included in IFC file as IFC ... right? If you've got solar panels in your project, we want them to be in the IFC file and to be labeled this way. And your specification, your delivery specification is going to specify that. You have the core concept of the IFC file, which is an export from a native authoring tool. And it should export the solar panel category and type to IFC whatever, right? When we create that IFC file, the solar panels in your Revit model or whatever you're using should be mapped into IFC a particular way. Your IDS is going to create it and check its compliance. There's a concept of a buildingSMART data dictionary, and this would be like providing additional data extension. So like an ETIM attribute, right? Is it global ETIM? It doesn't matter. Let's say it's a global standard data schema with attribution, and they have got a way that they classify solar panels. So your buildingSMART data dictionary could go in and look for those IFC types that you specified that are solar panels and provide the additional ETIM specification on top, right? So now we've extended that. We've added this dictionary so that all the different files from all the different types, maybe you haven't mapped solar panels to the same IFC class, but they all have the same ETIM attribute, right? So now we've got apples and apples. Any issues or reporting, and issues has become kind of a narrow concept. So topics can be reported in a BIM collaboration format, this BCF. So that specification is for how we share comments, topics, notes about the IFC file in an open format. There's a validation tool, which it's important to note that validates that the file meets the requirements of an IFC file. It is not validating the content within the file. The validation tool is not going to tell you that you named your solar panel correctly. It's just going to tell you that the IFC meets the correct open formats for IFC. And lastly, this open CD, or the concept, that would be a series of connections allowing all the different communications to happen. It's not like a software you install and save everything into. So I wanted to kind of run through this because, and I won't really touch on many of these today, but these are acronyms, and I'm an acronymist myself, and I love a 3-letter acronym, but they get thrown around a lot, and it's important to kind of just walk everyone through this really quick at the beginning. So a couple of links down here, and I should also say inside of this Miro board overall, this Follow the Sun, there's a work done for putting images. There's a whole IFC section with notes and links to further reading. So the resource is there. So let's run through quickly. And we set this at our webinar around this time last year. I think we did a webinar where we kind of went through the way that we were defining a digital twin, in essence, for our airport work group for digital twins. And it always started with these strategic outcomes, right? So you can see I'm on the right-hand side. I'm all the way out there saying, this is what we're trying to achieve. And that is the, call it what it is, right? You know, a public engagement tool, or, you know, tidal flow representation monitoring, or whatever it is that you want, is looking at that. I need to know what the tides are going to be next Tuesday so I can plan my construction work. Oh, okay. Well, let's visualize that. Let's put that against your program. That's your strategic outcome. What you want to do is then take those outcomes and build a set of requirements. So in ISO 90, this would be your organizational asset exchange information requirements. You're going to build out all of the requirements you have and project information requirements at a project or program level and say, this is what we want. And you're going to push that into your requirements. So that way you've got a chance of actually achieving what you want. Your next step would be to collect information, which could be, we're saying either static data or dynamic. There's a lot of different types of data that we could cover. In this instance, we're calling static data, like, for example, BIM. There's plenty of other, I guess, sources of static information. But if you think about, if you're let's say you're an owner and you own a series of assets, maybe you're going out to build that digital representation into a BIM model, or, you know, you're in planning, design, and construction, and you're kind of creating this existing condition set. You know, you're hopefully one day you're as-built BIM. Cindy, I'm going to say that. I don't know if we can define it, but I'm going to say it. You're going to build that, and then a series of dynamic data. So any active changing information. So like the sensors I was talking about, inclinometers and vibration, you know, tidal would be dynamic, that the tides are rising and falling. We know when to expect it, but it changes throughout the year. And we also know what those levels are, but they're always going to change. That's kind of constantly changing. So you've got this kind of match. Could be enterprise data. It's CMMS, stands for construction computerized maintenance management systems, right? So think about like you're running an operations and you need some computer system to manage all your assets, right? Which brings us to the next one. And what we always like to say when we do this is, like, you'll notice we haven't said digital twin yet, right? We've got static BIM data, we've got active data, we've got, you know, dynamic changing, and it's all, you know, at any point in that previous point, I think people have called what they have a digital twin, but we typically are waiting until we're taking either one or both of those and combining them to learn something, so gathering some insight. And this is the point where we're going to move into this digital twin, where we're actually using the requirements have specified some combination of static and active information, we've simulated it or analyzed it in a way that's provided us that strategic outcome. So that's the kind of architecture piece that we were talking about. And this is where Jerry was saying, you're going to step through and ask yourself, like in the table we showed earlier, okay, what do I need to achieve this? How is it active? Is it static? How am I going to get this going?
Yeah, and this is the area, I'll put my cursor on here. Some of these areas here, these connectors, you can kind of think of them as where you would be building things like interface control diagrams and, data flows where you got to look at frequency, data quality, data updates and all of that. And that gets specified there. So like you'll see that when you're looking at, say, the static BIM data here, there's information that has to be present in order to build that in terms of the requirements. You don't want to overfill that, you know. But then again, you have to identify what data is going to move out of there and then is going to be used for simulation and analytics, enhanced and groomed, and then ultimately answer the question or the purpose of what it's supposed to do, educate or answer a question. And I think what we're talking a little bit about is making sure you're looking upstream and downstream in order to define what that box looks like. It doesn't exist in isolation. You can't just say, oh, I've got a BIM model, I'm good. No, you have a starting point, and then you're going to have to groom and grow that data to a way in which you can do things with it. So that's just kind of one of the things we wanted to point out as well as part of this as a takeaway that we'd love you to have from this is kind of the upstream and downstream of this component-based model. So
Perfect. Really helpful. And as usual, a very good segue into my next section. So we're into this. I'm sorry about zooming out. Sometimes this makes people very kind of seasick, but we're into this like fourth column here, which is pretty far down, right? And we're into this slide component 6. And what I'm going to focus on for this next section, static piece. And that would be like the BIM data that you get. And how are we extracting that? And what I really want to focus with is something that we have been struggling with. I think the industry as a whole has been struggling with. When Jerry talked about it's not just about the box, it's about the arrows between them. The reason for all of the focus on that is because none of this can exist in a vacuum. We're going to need to be able to push and pull information out. In fact, I just had a comment from Jay Klein in the chat where they state, you might qualify that BIM data should not truly be considered static because buildings change more often than not, right? Or than we remember. Facilities change all the time, which is why this is important. I agree. Yes, static is maybe a little misleading here. It could be considered active. And our ability to kind of update this over time is critical to its usefulness, right? If we can't provide our owners with something they can update and change, then it's only going to be good for like a month, right? And I think that's a really important point.
that's a good point. And we might need to adapt this term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also Jay. Listen, we worked really hard to simplify this, so I don't know what to say. Let us have it. No, it's okay. So the problem that I'm going to spend a few minutes discussing right here, like I was saying, is something we've been working with. And the next section is a group activity. And I'm very, very interested in the attendees on this call. You joined for a reason, and I'm assuming it's something in this or maybe something a little bit further along. But the way or the kind of the way that we have chunked this, at least internally, is that we are in a file-based proprietary environment more often than not. So some examples would be like a Revit mechanical model, a Bentley roadway model, or a Civil 3D civil model. We're in a proprietary software application, and we're in a domain or sector-specific, discipline-specific kind of focused zone. And those are necessary because there's a lot of built-in mechanical focused tools inside of Revit that helps us author that environment. This is speaking about design or existing conditions BIM. what we're finding is that in order to be useful as a twin, we really need to move into more of a data or object base. The features that are inside of these models is what our clients or the owners or the general public is ultimately interested in. Those things that are going to exist in the world and they're going to interact with. So data and objects is what we need. And most of these platforms, all of them now, and with ever increasing kind of updates, are getting good at giving us all of the data and objects in a format that works for them. And the reason is because they've built so many special mechanical tools for modeling mechanical systems that it would be almost impossible for them to map all of that to an open data table. They want to map it to a model that works for them. So they've got an AEC data model is what Autodesk is really working on right now. Revit's got a model. Bentley have got their infrastructure language and their civil schema for their civil roadway models. And they interpret their native files into objects in that proprietary data model. And what we ultimately want, say, might be an IFC file, an open format, open BIM file that includes the geometry and the data models against it, right? And that goes back to that kind of workflow I was showing earlier. What most of us, I think, are kind of coming up against, and it would be nice to hear, and this is kind of what we're going to work into, is that it is not always intuitive how to extract a data model from our native design apps. I think Revit is pretty good at it. There are some, I mean, you can just make a table and export to Excel. But if you export an IFC model from Revit just out of the box, you do not get the same fidelity of data as you would out of a native file. I mean, I'm not picking on Revit or any particular software vendor. I think what we're starting to see is that we have a need for proprietary environments. Those are necessarily built on proprietary data models. And where we're trying to end up with is a data or object based in some sort of open format. And the way that we've been doing this is by exporting to IFC and then extracting those proprietary formats and kind of combining that into an IFC. The task, right? So I said export IFC files from native apps and export data models from native apps and then compare. And I think you'll find there's more than not a delta. And this is not also, I should say, this is also not an attack on IFC itself, because IFC, generally speaking, has a lot of classes that we could be mapping elements to. We could be mapping these data models to, but it's not always intuitive. And so the crux of today's presentation is essentially this slide. How do you make data usable for your digital twin? And that is about moving from your native applications, your native kind of data models, into an integrated data model that will work with other platforms, that will work with other systems. And that's essentially, and everything that we've been showing, the kind of the meat of the task. So there's a slide here with some proprietary workflows, and I'm just going to step through a couple of them. Again, this is not to, I'm not advocating for any of these. This is just what we are seeing. And these are in little boxes. I'm going to draw some little boxes around them. This one is Bentley Open Roads, I believe. Oh, that's not a good box. If I make it, there you go. So this one would be Bentley Open Roads. This one, sorry, I really shouldn't be building my presentation while I'm giving it, but this one is Revit. And this one down here, I could have just had one of you do this, couldn't I? Is Trimble. But I want to start with Open Roads and kind of give you a feel for what we're talking about. Most of these platforms will allow us to export information out. IFC versions, 4x3 release, you know, you can pick the boundary of the information. You can say what geometry you want. You can export it to a type and map it. This would be kind of the Open Roads workflow. Inside of Revit, you can see I have a civil element here in Revit, which is a girder. It's a steel plate girder. And it knows it's a girder. And Revit's giving me some basic parameters. You know, would you want to export as IFC by type? Export to IFC as, and it's blank. Predefined type is blank. It does give us a GUID. And in Revit, there's just a simple save as an IFC file. You can save your Revit file. But generally speaking, you're going to want to get into the options and configure this so that it's exporting classes correctly. So, electrical equipment, you can actually specify the classes and types. You can configure your settings and save them as a file that's made kind of for your system. And in most of these tools, I wrote Revit, but really all of them, there's a required intervention in your models and in your export settings. We are not able to just get an IFC file, an open format out of these. We're not able to build a data model that we can use in a digital twin without some configuration, both by going into the models and physically selecting the right element and, or hand typing or whatever it is, so that when you're on a girder, you've labeled it correctly and consistently. And also by building a configuration file that will map those. And then there are some tools. This is a Trimble's Quadri tool, which allows you to select and export as an IFC, and they've built in their own kind of schema mapping. You can view it visually. You can load your own mapping files to configure it. And so the reason that I'm focused on these proprietary tools is because all the examples we've shown, like my walk bridge example, were reliant on both the of these models into some sort of format that we could view, and then the interaction with the data they're in, which meant kind of scraping it into a table. And that's the key. Doesn't matter which one you use, but generally speaking, you're going to have to do interventions on the models and in your export settings or your mappings.
So this is an intervention that adds overhead to your digital twin overall. And to the extent you can slim it, it is better. And that's partly why all the standards work and all that other stuff that we're advocating is at the core of having a digital twin that you can sustain. So you got to build the sustainability idea and in it as you build it. And that's part of is keeping it simple, or necessary, sufficient, whatever you want to call it. But now.
Exactly. And the next kind of section about making data usable is a little bit of an example and a generic. What I just kind of showed were the proprietary formats and the mapping you can do. I would say we still struggle with some of them. Like for instance, buildingSMART has been very good about like having elements, an expanded group of elements. You can see IFC pavement here. They have all the documentation there. And despite what we do, there are still times where you may have some pavement that gets exported as like it knows it's untreated base course, UTBC. It knows the item numbers. It's mapped all the features to an IFC file structure, but the entity still comes as a building element proxy. We are still kind of, fighting with this in some ways, but we are becoming much, much more proficient at mapping elements from native software into open IFC formats. And so example I'm going to give here and kind of walk you through is a configuration file in JSON format. And these are the kind of the schemas and the features that it's finding in the native file. So I'm just going to find you a good example. Where's a good one? Here you go. For this ArchFizz schema, there may be an element in there called railing, and it is going to tell the system to map that to IFC railing, ramp to IFC ramp, roof to IFC roof, stair to IFC stair. This configuration file means that you can open it in any open viewer or any platform thereon, and all of that data will have been mapped to it. This is kind of view from BIM Vision, but could be whatever because you've mapped the file that way. And this transformation of the data from the proprietary into the open is one of the ways that we're getting around how we're going to put all this together and how it's going to be usable in a twin later. Which kind of leads us to our next section, which is an interactive piece. And we are at about 17 minutes to go. And so I think it would be fun to just dive back in. If you've left the board, maybe come back. If you're open to it, I'm going to drag everybody over here. Again, sorry about this. You can leave once you Once you come, you can um, leave. Uh-oh, I just loaded something. No, okay. All right, so we tried to like make a kind of standard workflow here on these swim lanes. Basic, intermediate, advanced. This is not a science. But static BIM data, the way this works is there's a dot voting system up here. It says dot voting, and this is a pretty cool tool. You can just grab one of these and drop it on the one that you want, and we can set a 5-minute timer. But I'm going to walk you through it really quick. Static BIM. So we're obtaining static BIM data through their native platforms. We're obtaining dynamic data from dynamic sources. We're creating twins using proprietary tools and formats. We're integrating our static and dynamic data into an open format, and we're utilizing open and integrated data inside of a digital twin. Think of this as kind of like a maturity kind of growth curve for open twins and the use of data. I'd love to see where people are. And I think, if you drag a dot down to what you're currently doing, so you could have dots on multiple ones all the way down, right? It will give us a feel for where people, and you're already doing it, so I won't start the timer. Maybe I'll just watch and give it like another 2 minutes. And any comments you have. We also tried to put something up here which says, I have never extracted data from a model. I've never linked dynamic data. I felt like we didn't start maybe at the very beginning. I don't know if I can lock this. Can I lock it? No, it's not lockable. If I lock it, can you still drag? You can. Okay. And if you've accidentally moved anything in this file, it is not your fault. It is impossible not to move things, especially because I didn't do a good job of locking everything. It's just kind of how zoom and pan works. So don't worry about it. Even I do it. Yes, Cindy made us a vote here. Never linked to dynamic data for use in a twin. These are great comments. I don't know. Have there been a lot of comments? I'm afraid to zoom in and out because some people may still be following me. But we can get to that in a minute because I do want to leave a minute to talk. I think this is a really good kind of, and I almost did this at the beginning, but this is a really good kind of example of where people are. And it leads me to the next interactive session that I was hoping we could go through. Just below this kind of flow as we work our way down. And I would say, I'm guessing, the reason that most of us have stopped around here in the middle, we're creating, twins using proprietary tools and formats, is because of what I showed. It's difficult to extract the data out from multiple different tools and then make apples the same thing as apples. I mean, I'm lucky if I get apples to oranges. So it's very hard to move down to the right because of the issues that I think we end up having. So I'm going to move to this last one in this data flow activity. And this is more of a sticky note one. So it's like, so what are you doing where you're doing it? How are people doing this right now? Is what we've been showing relevant to you? Like how are you extracting information? How are you integrating it? And how are you importing it to your twin? The reason I was interested in this, I think, is because there are ones that are going to work better than others. And, it might help to start with those low-hanging fruit if you are part of an organization that hasn't really started. I can see Lou says he's never done it before. And that's 100% fine. So hopefully there's a bunch of Lou's on here, and this has been a really, or a good way to get introduced to the concepts.
Yeah, and even if people can identify what they think their barriers are, is it resource time? Is it knowledge? Is it tool difficulty? Is it lack of a vision of what you're trying to accomplish, or competing visions?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say you've got the ability to build SQLite to integrate. I've seen some people just taking it all to.
I see some graph database action going on in there. That's interesting. Yeah.
It must be David. Airtables. Anybody using Airtable? Somebody's in the graph. Yeah, I love it. A lot of Bentley, which is interesting. Autodesk Bentley Trimble, SQL, MicroStation, item types. I think just as some background here, Autodesk, Bentley, and Trimble, very different ones, but the MicroStation item types, those are the parameters, that you want to fill out. That's an intervention you make in the tool. You build a workspace that has features and definitions and item types that people can select. In Civil 3D, those are property sets, and in Revit, those are parameters, but it's essentially the same interventions that you've got to kind of move through and integrate. I am not seeing any Esri platforms on here either. And ArcGIS is typically on the right-hand side. We're extracting information and we're moving to ArcGIS.
Or some kind of hybrid between the ArcGIS and CAD.
I think there's a couple of questions also down at the bottom, right? List challenges to getting started here, or what do you need to start? Where are you stuck? There's 10 minutes left, and I think I'd like to stay on this slide or move around as questions come up, but let's let this be kind of an open Q&A session for these last 10 minutes, and maybe even talk about how we're using this information and keep building out this vision across these, I don't know if you call them buckets or.
Well, Chris, this is kind of back to our original component-based model of this. Is like, these are the connectors. So what is the nature of those connectors? How do we go about building them? What are some of the barriers in building them, etc.? And I think that's the work of our industry now. And this is kind of everybody giving back or giving forward into the business to figure this out. And part of it is solving for the right challenge. Interesting. And I see connecting to like the CDE. I mean, these are high level maturity things to having that kind of a data environment. The collaboration data, and just I think that doing some of this digital twin work really forces the need to push on maturity. Yeah.
IFC OpenShell is interesting as well. I think that there's a lot to be said for using those to get information around. XML exports is a really good point. We've recently been using XML for machine guidance, right, in construction, as a format to go from your native app out to a piece of construction equipment in the field. How does that happen? And is XML the only tool or the best way to transfer that between platforms, or is there an IFC workflow? That's interesting.
Well, and how you make the decision whether it's the best is a kind of a question too, in terms of the overhead in moving the data. If you have a high frequency data and you're consuming a lot of bandwidth, that can get expensive in a cloud environment. So it's interesting. So it might not be whether just that works, but what does it cost me to actually run that?
There's a comment down here of collaboration with someone using Airtable. I put Airtable up here. I don't know if there's other people using it. The place where I've seen Airtable shine is in data dictionaries, and I'm not speaking like in a buildingSMART data dictionary, but in, say, comparing and mapping. Let's say you wanted to go from OmniClass to Uniformat to IFC, for some domain, right? Airtable is a really, really fantastic way to structure all that data and visualize it in different ways. It has a ton of like plugin tools. And so that's where I've seen it really shine.
So, Chris, just to do a quick time check, it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe now would be a great time to summarize things a little bit for folks and see if
Sure.
there's if people want to put down like, hey, burning questions, or this made me think of something, if they could drop those down below. Like right where you have these post-it notes would be good. So maybe those two things we could do is summarize, and then also people drop notes of what they would like to know more about or next topic.
Absolutely. Um, Also, I know David Alvarez has done some work, and it's been like with our group on graph databases. And I think that's another really cool presentation. I don't know, David, if you're interested in that, reach out and send you a link. Um, we're excited about that work because
Yeah.
how these elements relate to each other and our ability to kind of shift the way that we capture all this data is going to make it a lot more extensible. Um,
Yeah, especially
we would
moving
love to
towards
hear.
that feature-based, right? I mean, if you're using a feature-based rather than a file-based, all of a sudden graph database just kind of explodes things into a very interesting territory. But yeah, it would be awesome if we could do that as a presentation. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I think the only other like wrap up comment from me, I really appreciate everyone's time for joining in and listening to us, run through all of our favorite topics on this subject. Um, I hope that you come back to this board. I see people in it all the time. It's an incredible resource, and every comment you put in, every workflow you try and describe, every person you connect with here makes us all better because it's been posted to LinkedIn many, many times. It's had hundreds of people in it at once, and um, you know, it's just a resource for everyone. And so I hope that if you take nothing else away from today, I really hope that you can get some value out of this.
We need to create a section on this board, Chris. That's a great summary remarks, but I think it would be awesome to add that if we could create a section where people could just say, hey, I've looked at the board. This is a burning question in my mind, and then build off of that. Maybe we can do that, and when we send out a note on everything. Good stuff. And just from my perspective, I really love seeing people participate, and I think it has
Thank you.
value. Um, thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely my favorite part too. Thank you guys for providing this platform so that, people can come in and just interact.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cindy points out there is
Thank
a
you,
Q&A and
James.
networking session on the board, so just check above. So
Thanks
Yeah,
for
we'll
putting.
include this link to the recording as well. This session has been recorded, so we'll be posting the recording and then we'll include the link to this Mara board. Thank you, Chris and Jerry, and thank you everyone else for joining us. Any other questions? Cindy says there's a Q&A. Oh, Q&A networking session above.
Yeah,
there's like a section.
remember that.
I'm going to zoom out. There's a section up here called, let's see.
Discussion area.
There's a Q&A, questions and answers.
Q&A there, yeah.
And there's also a networking area where you can, do a little brief bio and ask for what you want to see. You can put your information down and what you are really interested in. There's areas for you to say like when you came and what your name is. There's kind of like you just start on this row and work your way through. This thing is organized this way. So if you just start at the top, start working your way through. It was created for an event, but we've just left it live. So
Thank you for bringing that up, Cindy. I really appreciate that. Because it was burning in the back of my mind going, I thought we had it, but I'm not sure. But yes, absolutely. That's great.
No, you're so welcome. They just unmuted my mic. You guys are the absolute best. Thank you so much for always volunteering your time and sharing all of this information, Chris and Jerry. Super grateful for you. For those of you on the call, Chris and Jerry are the leaders of our airport work group and digital twin committee. You can take advantage of them. Every 2 weeks, we meet monthly, and then they have their own separate meeting. I sit in, I learn something every single time that I sit in and meet with them. So they're great resources for you and really for our industry at large. So I'm grateful to you guys. Great presentation. Thanks for promoting the board, and thank you for your volunteer work. We're grateful for you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Be
joining.
well. See you
Bye.
next time. Bye.